I knew the moment I saw Linda Pemberton marching across my lawn that my peaceful Saturday morning was about to go straight to hell. The HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, had that particular look on her face, the one that meant she'd found some new bylaw to weaponize against me. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair didn't move an inch in the dry Arizona wind as she stomped toward my backyard, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. I was sitting on my patio, enjoying my morning coffee and checking my phone when I heard her shrill voice cut through the morning air. Kevin Foster, I need to speak with you immediately." I set down my coffee mug and stood up, already feeling my blood pressure rising. Linda had been a thorn in my side since I'd moved into this supposedly upscale neighborhood 6 months ago. Every week it was something new. My grass was a quarter-inch too long. My car was parked 3 inches over the property line. My mailbox needed repainting because it had a tiny scratch. "Morning, Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What seems to be the problem?" She pointed an accusatory finger at my propane tank sitting next to my grill. It was a standard 20-pound tank, the kind you could buy at any hardware store or gas station in America. Nothing special about it. "That," she declared dramatically, "is a violation of Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws. All propane tanks must be completely obscured from view by approved decorative screening." I stared at her. "You're kidding me." "I most certainly am not kidding," she snapped. Her eyes, magnified slightly behind her designer glasses, were cold and unforgiving. "The bylaws are very clear on this matter. You have 24 hours to remove that eyesore or face a fine of $100 per day. Linda, it's a propane tank. Everyone in this neighborhood has one. I can see 3 from where I'm standing. Those homeowners have theirs properly screened," she retorted. "Yours is in plain sight, destroying the aesthetic integrity of our community." I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. Getting into a screaming match with Linda would accomplish nothing. The woman thrived on conflict. "Fine," I said. "I'll build a little screen for it this weekend." 24 hours, she repeated, making a note on her clipboard. "Not a minute more." She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing there wondering, not for the first time, why I'd ever agreed to buy a house in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. My real estate agent had assured me that Meadowbrook Estates was one of the more reasonable communities. I should have known better. The rest of Saturday passed without incident. I went to Home Depot and bought some cedar lattice panels to build a small decorative screen for my propane tank. It seemed like a ridiculous waste of time and money, but it was easier than fighting with Linda. Sunday morning, I woke up late, feeling lazy and content. The Arizona sun was already heating up the day, promising temperatures in the high 90s by afternoon. I made myself breakfast and headed outside around 10 to start building the screen for my propane tank. The tank was gone. I stood there in my backyard, coffee mug in hand, staring at the empty space next to my grill where my propane tank had been sitting less than 24 hours ago. The connector hose dangled uselessly in the air. "What the hell?" I muttered, setting down my coffee and walking around the patio. Maybe I'd moved it yesterday and forgotten. But no, I clearly remembered seeing it there when Linda had her meltdown. I checked my storage shed, my garage, even the side yard, but the tank was nowhere to be found. A growing suspicion began forming in my mind. It seemed crazy, even for Linda, but I couldn't think of any other explanation. I pulled out my phone and called my next-door neighbor, Marcus Chen. He was a software engineer who worked from home and often sat out on his deck during the day. "Hey Marcus, did you see anyone in my backyard yesterday afternoon or evening?" Funny you should ask, Marcus said. I saw Linda over there around 6. She was carrying something, but I couldn't tell what it was. I figured she was just doing another one of her inspections. My jaw clenched. Thanks, man. I hung up and immediately dialed Linda's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice syrupy sweet. Kevin, how can I help you? Where's my propane tank? There was a pause. I have no idea what you're talking about. Linda, I know you took it. My neighbor saw you in my backyard yesterday evening. That's theft. You need to return it immediately, or I'm calling the police. Her tone changed instantly, becoming sharp and defensive. I did no such thing. I confiscated community property that was in violation of HOA bylaws. Community property? Are you insane? That's my personal property that I bought with my own money. According to Section 12, Paragraph 8, any items left in violation of community standards for more than 24 hours become property of the HOA and can be confiscated for the betterment of the community, she recited smugly. I'd read those bylaws front to back when I moved in, and I was pretty sure no such provision existed. That's complete nonsense, and you know it. Return my property, Linda. I'm afraid I can't do that. The tank has been disposed of as per HOA regulations. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, you're welcome to attend the next board meeting on the 15th. Good day, Kevin. She hung up on me. I stood there, phone in hand, absolutely furious. This woman had actually stolen my property, and she was hiding behind made-up HOA rules to justify it. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher listened patiently and then informed me that property disputes within HOAs were generally civil matters, not criminal ones, and suggested I contact a lawyer or file a small claims court case. Frustrated, I hung up and sat down to think. Going through small claims court would take months and cost me more in time and aggravation than the tank was worth. But this wasn't really about the tank anymore. It was about principle. Linda Pemberton couldn't just steal people's property and get away with it. I was sitting there fuming when my phone rang. It was my buddy Derek Holloway, who worked as an investigator for Southwest Gas Corporation. We'd been friends since college, and I'd helped him move into his place in Temp last year. Hey man, still on for golf next Saturday? Derek asked. Derek, I'm glad you called. I need some advice about something weird that just happened. I explained the entire situation with Linda and the missing propane tank. Derek listened quietly, and when I finished, he was silent for a moment. Say that again, he finally said. She took your propane tank, the one you were actively using for your grill. Yeah, right off my patio, just disconnected it and walked off with it. And what did she do with it? She claims she disposed of it, but honestly, I have no idea. Why? Derek's voice took on a more serious tone. Kevin, I need you to think carefully. When she took that tank, was it full or mostly full? It was about 3/4 full. I just refilled it at the gas station last week. And she lives in the same development as you. Yeah, 3 streets over. Does she have a gas grill? I thought about it. I'd been to Linda's house once for a mandatory HOA welcome meeting when I first moved in. Yeah, she does. I remember seeing it on her back patio, big fancy stainless steel thing. Derek let out a low whistle. Kevin, I think your HOA president might have committed theft of service. Theft of service? What's that? It's a crime. In Arizona, if someone takes propane, natural gas, or other utilities with the intent to use them without paying for them, it's considered theft of service. It's covered under Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 13, Chapter 18. If the value is over $100, it can be a Class 6 felony. I sat up straighter. You're serious? Dead serious. Think about it. She took a tank that you paid to fill, which means you paid for that propane. If she's now using that propane herself, she's essentially stolen a utility service. It's the same as if she'd tapped into your natural gas line or siphoned electricity from your house. Can you investigate something like that? I mean, is that part of your job? Actually, yes. Part of my job is investigating propane theft, illegal connections, meter tampering, and theft of service cases. We work closely with law enforcement on these matters. If you want, I can open an official investigation. Do it, I said immediately. I'm tired of Linda getting away with whatever she wants just because she has a clipboard and an inflated sense of authority. All right, I'll need to do this by the book. Can you give me a written statement about what happened, including the approximate value of the propane? I spent the next hour typing up a detailed account of everything that had occurred, including Marcus's observation of Linda in my backyard. I estimated that the propane in the tank was worth about $75, which when combined with the $100 value of the tank itself, put the total value around $175. Derek received my statement and called me back later that afternoon. Okay, I've opened a formal investigation. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to pay a visit to Linda Pemberton's residence and conduct an inspection. I'll need to verify whether she's in possession of your propane or using it. Do you have any way to identify the tank as yours? I painted my address on it with a silver marker, right on the collar near the valve. 2847 Sagebrush Lane. Perfect. That'll make identification much easier. Monday morning arrived and I took the day off work, too anxious to concentrate on anything else. Derek had told me he'd call as soon as he'd completed his inspection of Linda's property. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:30, my phone rang. "Kevin, you're not going to believe this," Derek said, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice. "I just left Linda Pemberton's house. She not only had your propane tank, but she was actively using it. It was hooked up to her grill, and she'd attempted to paint over your address marking, but I could still read it under the paint layer." "You're kidding." I wish I was. It gets worse. When I questioned her about it, she told me that as HOA president, she has the right to confiscate and repurpose any property that violates community standards. She actually believes the bylaws give her that authority. So, what happens now? I've documented everything with photographs and video. I've also retained custody of the propane tank as evidence. I'm filing a formal report with the Phoenix Police Department, and I'm recommending they press charges for theft of service. Given that she's admitted to taking and using the propane, and the value exceeds $100, this could be charged as a Class 6 felony. A mix of satisfaction and disbelief washed over me. She's actually going to be charged with a crime. If the prosecutor's office agrees to pursue it, yes. And given how straightforward this case is, with physical evidence, witness statements, and her own admission, I think they will. Derek, I can't thank you enough. Hey, you're my friend, but more importantly, this is my job. People need to understand that stealing utilities isn't a victimless crime. It drives up costs for everyone and can be dangerous when people start disconnecting and moving propane tanks without proper training. The next few days were tense. I didn't hear anything from Linda, which was unusual. Normally, she'd be sending me violation notices or stopping by to measure my grass height. The silence was almost eerie. On Thursday afternoon, I got a call from a Detective Sandra Martinez with the Phoenix Police Department. "Mr. Foster, I'm calling regarding the theft of service complaint filed against Linda Pemberton. I wanted to let you know that we've reviewed the evidence provided by the utility investigator, and we're moving forward with charges. Miss Pemberton will be receiving a summons to appear in court." That fast? The case is fairly straightforward. We have photographic evidence, witness testimony, and the defendant's own admission. The prosecutor's office has agreed to charge her with theft of service under ARS 13-1802, as well as theft under ARS 13-1802. Together, these charges constitute serious offenses. What kind of penalties is she looking at? I can't speak to that specifically, as it's up to the prosecutor and ultimately the judge, but theft of service with a value over $100 can carry jail time, fines, and restitution. She'll also have a criminal record if convicted. After I hung up with Detective Martinez, I sat on my couch trying to process everything. Part of me felt vindicated. Linda had pushed too far and now she was facing real consequences. But another part of me felt almost sorry for her. Almost. That sympathy evaporated on Friday evening when I found a note stuck to my front door. It was from Linda, written in her precise, controlling handwriting. Your malicious and unfounded accusations have caused irreparable harm to my reputation and standing in this community. I am consulting with my attorney about filing a defamation lawsuit against you. You will regret this vendetta. I took a photo of the note and immediately forwarded it to Detective Martinez. She called me back within an hour. Mr. Foster, I need to advise you not to have any direct contact with Miss Pemberton. What she's doing could be construed as witness intimidation. I'm going to have a conversation with her and her attorney. She has an attorney already. Most people do by this point. It's actually better that way. It keeps communications more professional. The weekend passed without further incident, but on Monday morning, I received an urgent email from the HOA board. It announced an emergency meeting that evening to discuss recent developments affecting HOA leadership. I decided to attend. I wanted to see how the rest of the board would react to their president being charged with a crime. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a modest building near the entrance of Meadowbrook Estates. When I arrived at 7, the parking lot was packed. Apparently, word had spread fast, and everyone wanted to see the drama unfold. Inside, the room was buzzing with conversation. I recognized most of my neighbors, including Marcus, who waved me over to sit with him. This is going to be interesting, he whispered. I heard Linda tried to get the meeting canceled, but the vice president overruled her. At 7:15, the board members filed in and took their seats at the front table. Linda was notably absent. The vice president, a retired accountant named Robert Stafford, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, he began. I'm sure you're all aware that our HOA president, Linda Pemberton, has been charged with theft of service and theft in connection with an incident involving another homeowner's property. The board has discussed this matter at length, and we've made some difficult decisions. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Is Linda going to jail? I can't speak to the legal proceedings as they're ongoing. However, given the serious nature of the charges and the breach of trust this represents, the board has voted to remove Linda Pemberton from her position as president, effective immediately. Additionally, we're conducting a full review of all actions taken under her authority to ensure no other homeowners have been similarly affected. The room erupted in conversation. Robert had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. Furthermore, he continued, we're implementing new oversight measures to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. No single board member will have the authority to confiscate homeowner property under any circumstances. Any disputes will be handled through proper legal channels. Another hand went up, this time from an elderly man I recognized from a few houses down. What about all those fines she's been issuing? Are those legitimate? Robert sighed. That's part of our review. we've discovered that Linda has been somewhat creative in her interpretation of the bylaws. We'll be reaching out to affected homeowners individually. After the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Linda. A few shared their own stories of harassment and excessive fines. It became clear that Linda had been abusing her authority for quite some time, and I'd just been the one to finally call her on it. Marcus and I walked out to the parking lot together. "I've got to hand it to you, Kevin," he said. "I don't think anyone else would have pushed back this hard. Most people would have just bought a new tank and let it go." "It was never really about the tank," I replied. "It was about the principle. People like Linda count on everyone else being too tired or too busy to fight back. Someone had to draw a line." The following weeks brought a strange sense of peace to the neighborhood. Without Linda's constant surveillance and harassment, people seemed more relaxed. Violations that would have drawn immediate fines under her regime went unnoticed. The new board seemed content to focus on actual issues like common area maintenance and community events, rather than measuring grass heights and counting flowers. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Linda had hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and was planning to fight the charges. She maintained that she'd done nothing wrong and that she was being persecuted for doing her job as HOA president. Derek kept me updated on the case's progress. The prosecutor's office had decided to offer Linda a plea deal: plead guilty to a reduced charge of theft, pay full restitution for the tank and propane, perform community service, and accept a year of probation. In exchange, they dropped the theft of service charge. "Is she going to take it?" I asked. "Her lawyer's apparently recommending it, but Linda's refusing. She wants to go to trial. She thinks she can convince a jury that the HOA bylaws gave her the authority to take your property." "That's insane. Those bylaws don't exist. I know you know, and her lawyer knows, but she's convinced she's in the right. Pride's a hell of a thing." The trial date was set for late August, about 3 months after the initial incident. As the summer heat intensified in Phoenix, so did Linda's campaign to paint herself as the victim. She gave an interview to a local news station, claiming she was being targeted for simply trying to maintain community standards. The interview backfired spectacularly. The reporter did their homework and discovered that at least 15 other homeowners had complaints about Linda's behavior. The story that aired focused less on Linda's victim narrative and more on the pattern of HOA abuse in suburban communities. I was contacted by the reporter, Vanessa Chen from Channel 12 News, asking if I'd be willing to share my story on camera. "I appreciate the interest," I told her, "but I'd rather let the legal process play out. I don't want to do anything that could compromise the case." "I understand," Vanessa said. "But if you change your mind or if you'd like to comment after the trial, please reach out. Stories like this are important. HOAs have tremendous power over people's homes and lives, but there's very little oversight." As August approached, I received a subpoena to testify at Linda's trial. Derek would be testifying as well, along with Marcus and several other witnesses. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix. The courthouse was already sweltering despite the early hour, the summer sun turning the concrete plaza into an oven. Inside, the courtroom was mercifully air-conditioned. I sat in the gallery, watching as the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Ortiz, laid out the case against Linda. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this is a simple case of theft. The defendant, Linda Pemberton, took property that didn't belong to her and used it for her own benefit. The fact that she held a position of authority in a homeowners association doesn't give her the right to steal from her neighbors." Linda's attorney, a slick-looking man named Charles Wright, argued that Linda had acted in good faith, believing she had the authority to remove items in violation of HOA rules. My client dedicated countless volunteer hours to maintaining the standards and property values of Meadowbrook Estates, he said. She may have been overzealous in this instance, but there was no criminal intent. This is a civil dispute at most, not a criminal matter. I was called to testify on the second day. Walking to the witness stand, I could feel Linda's eyes burning into me from the defense table. I was sworn in and took my seat. Miss Ortiz walked me through the events of that weekend. Linda's initial complaint, my plan to build a screen, and the discovery that my tank was missing. I testified about the phone call where Linda had admitted to taking the tank and her claim about confiscated property. When Charles Wright cross-examined me, he tried to make it seem like I'd been a difficult homeowner, constantly at odds with the HOA. Isn't it true, Mr. Foster, that you'd received multiple violation notices in the months prior to this incident? I'd received several notices, yes. For things like my grass being slightly too long or my car being parked a few inches over the property line. Minor things that I corrected immediately. So you had a contentious relationship with Miss Pemberton. I wouldn't say contentious. I'd say she was extremely rigid in her enforcement of rules, sometimes to an unreasonable degree. But I always complied with her requests. Until this incident with the propane tank, I was planning to comply. She gave me 24 hours to screen the tank, and I bought materials to do exactly that. She took the tank before those 24 hours had elapsed. Wright tried a few more angles, but I stuck to the facts. When I was dismissed, I returned to the gallery to watch the rest of the trial. Derek's testimony was particularly damaging to Linda's case. He methodically explained his investigation, the evidence he'd collected, and Linda's admission that she'd taken and was using the propane. The photographs of my address marking visible under her paint job were especially compelling. Marcus testified about seeing Linda in my backyard carrying something. The timeline he provided matched perfectly with when the tank had disappeared. The prosecution also called Robert Stafford, the HOA vice president. He testified that he'd reviewed the bylaws extensively and found no provision allowing for confiscation of homeowner property. He also revealed that the board had discovered Linda had removed items from other properties in the past, though this was the first time anyone had challenged her. On the third day, Linda took the stand in her own defense. It was a mistake. She was defiant and unapologetic, insisting that she'd done nothing wrong. When Miss Ortiz questioned her, Linda became increasingly agitated. Miss Pemberton, you admit you took Mr. Foster's propane tank from his property. I removed a violation from community property. It wasn't community property. It was Mr. Foster's private patio on his private lot. The bylaws give me authority over all visible areas of the community. Can you point to the specific bylaw that gives you the right to take someone's personal property? Linda hesitated. Section 12, paragraph 8. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Miss Ortiz picked up a copy of the Meadowbrook Estates bylaws and handed it to Linda. Can you please read Section 12, paragraph 8 aloud for the jury? Linda's face began to turn red as she looked at the page. It's about landscaping requirements. There's nothing in there about confiscating property, is there? The board has certain discretionary powers. To take someone's propane tank and use it yourself. I was going to return it eventually. After you'd used all the propane that Mr. Foster had paid for, Linda's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. Her testimony had only reinforced that she'd knowingly taken my property with no legal authority to do so. The closing arguments were straightforward. Miss Ortiz hammered home the point that Linda had stolen property, used the propane inside, and tried to cover her tracks by painting over my address marking. Wright tried to appeal to sympathy, painting Linda as an overworked volunteer who'd made a mistake. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood and delivered the verdict, guilty on both counts of theft and theft of service. Linda's face went white. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Linda was released on her own recognizance. The sentencing hearing was surprisingly well attended. Apparently, the case had become something of a cause célèbre in the HOA reform community. Several advocacy groups had reached out to me, wanting to use the case as an example of why HOAs needed better oversight and accountability. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over the sentencing. She was a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s with a reputation for being fair but firm. Miss Pemberton, you've been found guilty of theft and theft of service. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything you'd like to say? Linda stood, and for a moment I thought she might finally show some remorse. Instead, she launched into a speech about how she'd been a dedicated public servant, how she'd worked tirelessly to maintain property values, and how this prosecution was a miscarriage of justice. Judge Morrison listened patiently, her expression neutral. When Linda finally finished, the judge removed her glasses and looked directly at her. Miss Pemberton, I've reviewed the facts of this case carefully. What concerns me most is your complete lack of acknowledgement that what you did was wrong. You held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust. You took something that didn't belong to you, used it for your own benefit, and showed no remorse for your actions. The judge paused, putting her glasses back on. I'm sentencing you to 2 years of probation. During that time, you are prohibited from serving in any leadership capacity in any homeowners association. You will pay full restitution to Mr. Foster in the amount of $175, plus his court costs. You will also perform 200 hours of community service. Additionally, this conviction will remain on your record. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor, Linda said quietly, her earlier defiance finally broken. Good. I hope you'll use this experience to reflect on your actions and understand that no position of authority gives you the right to take what isn't yours. We're adjourned. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It had been nearly 4 months since Linda had taken my propane tank, and finally, there was resolution. Derek met me outside, clapping me on the shoulder. Well, you did it. You held her accountable. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have gotten anywhere without your investigation. Just doing my job. But seriously, Kevin, this case is going to make waves. I've already had calls from other utility companies asking about our investigation procedures. People are starting to realize that theft of service is real and has consequences. Over the next few weeks, life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal, though it was a different kind of normal. The new HOA board, led by Robert Stafford, took a much more reasonable approach to community management. They focused on actual maintenance issues and community building rather than nitpicking violations. I received a check from Linda for $175, along with a court-ordered letter of apology. The apology was clearly written by her lawyer and lacked any real feeling, but it didn't matter. The point had been made. Several homeowners who'd been on the receiving end of Linda's excessive fines and harassment approached the new board about getting refunds. Robert set up a review committee to examine all fines issued during Linda's tenure. Many were found to be based on made-up violations or overly strict interpretations of the bylaws. The HOA ended up refunding over $12,000 to various homeowners. Linda herself became something of a pariah in the neighborhood. I heard she was trying to sell her house and move to a different community, somewhere she could start fresh without the stigma of a criminal conviction following her. I ran into her once at the grocery store in late September. She was in the checkout line ahead of me, and when she turned and saw me, her face went pale. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I thought about saying something, maybe offering some kind of olive branch, but before I could speak, she grabbed her bags and hurried out of the store. Marcus and I talked about it later that evening, sitting on his deck with beers. "You feel bad about what happened to her?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "No, I feel bad that it had to come to that, but I don't regret holding her accountable. She was abusing her power and making people's lives miserable. Someone had to stop her." "True. And honestly, the neighborhood's been so much better since she's been gone. People actually talk to each other now instead of worrying about getting violation notices." He was right. There was a different energy in Meadowbrook Estates now. People were friendlier, more relaxed. The HOA was functioning as it should, handling necessary business without becoming a tyrannical presence in everyone's lives. In October, I was contacted by Vanessa Chen from Channel 12 News again. She was doing a follow-up story on HOA reform efforts in Arizona and wanted to know if I'd be willing to participate now that the legal case was concluded. This time, I agreed. The interview aired on a Tuesday evening. Vanessa had done an excellent job, interviewing not just me but also other homeowners who'd had issues with overzealous HOAs. She also spoke with state legislators who were considering new laws to provide better oversight and accountability for homeowners associations. HOAs serve an important function, one legislator explained. They maintain common areas and help preserve property values, but when they are run by individuals who abuse their authority, they can make homeowners' lives miserable. We need better mechanisms for accountability and dispute resolution. The story generated a lot of discussion. I received emails and messages from people all over Arizona and even other states, sharing their own HOA horror stories. It became clear that Linda's behavior, while extreme, wasn't unique. There were thousands of people dealing with similar situations. A few advocacy groups asked if I'd be willing to speak at community meetings about my experience. I declined most of them. I wasn't looking to become the face of HOA reform. I just wanted to live peacefully in my home. However, I did agree to speak at one event in November, a town hall meeting in Phoenix about proposed HOA reform legislation. The room was packed with homeowners, HOA board members, and legislators. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "My name is Kevin Foster, and earlier this year, my HOA president stole my propane tank." That sounds almost comical when you say it out loud, but it wasn't funny at the time. It was a violation of my property rights and my trust. What made it worse was that she believed she had the right to do it, that her position gave her authority over my personal property. I paused, looking around the room. The solution isn't to eliminate HOAs. The solution is accountability. Board members need to understand that they are serving their communities, not ruling over them. They need to be held to the same laws as everyone else. And homeowners need to know they have recourse when those in power abuse their authority. The audience applauded, and several people came up to me afterward to share their own stories and thank me for speaking out. By December, life had truly settled into a comfortable rhythm. The holidays were approaching, and Meadowbrook Estates was decorated beautifully. The new HOA board had organized a community Christmas party at the clubhouse. something Linda had never bothered to do. I attended the party with a pecan pie I'd made, one of the few dishes I could reliably prepare without disaster. The clubhouse was packed with neighbors, many of whom I'd never really talked to during Linda's reign of terror. Robert Stafford found me by the punch bowl and shook my hand warmly. "Kevin, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. I know it wasn't easy, going through that trial and all the publicity." "It needed to be done," I replied, "but I'm glad it's behind us now." "Me too. And I wanted you to know that the board has been working on revising our bylaws. We're implementing some new safeguards to prevent another Linda situation. We'd love your input if you're interested in serving on the review committee." I considered it. Part of me wanted to stay far away from HOA politics after everything that had happened. But another part recognized that this was an opportunity to actually make a difference, to help ensure that other homeowners wouldn't have to go through what I'd experienced. "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to help." As the party continued around me, I found myself reflecting on the past year. It had started with such promise, moving into a new home in a nice neighborhood. Then it had devolved into months of stress and conflict. But ultimately, it had led to positive change, not just for me but for the entire community. I thought about Linda, wondering where she was and what she was doing. I'd heard she'd finally sold her house and moved to Scottsdale, to a community with no HOA. Part of me hoped she'd learned something from the experience, that she'd realized the error of her ways. But I suspected she still viewed herself as the victim, persecuted for simply trying to do her job. That was her burden to carry, not mine. Marcus joined me with a plate full of cookies. "Pretty good turnout." "This is nice, actually feeling like part of a community instead of just avoiding the HOA police." I laughed. "Yeah, it's amazing what happens when people aren't afraid of getting fined for having their trash cans visible for 30 seconds after pickup. Speaking of which, did you hear? Linda's new place in Scottsdale. She's already been complaining to the local homeowners about how her neighbors don't maintain their properties to her standards." "Of course she is. Some people never change. But at least she's Scottsdale's problem now, not ours." We clinked our punch cups together in a mock toast. The evening wound down around 10. As I walked back to my house, I noticed my patio and the little cedar screen I'd eventually built for my new propane tank. It looked nice, actually, better than the exposed tank had. But that wasn't the point. The point was that it had been my choice to make that improvement, not something forced on me by someone abusing their authority. Inside, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on my couch, reflecting on everything that had happened. In a strange way, I was almost grateful for the experience. It had taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself, about not backing down when you know you're right, and about the importance of accountability in positions of power. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the news. The proposed HOA reform legislation had passed its first committee vote and was moving forward in the state legislature. If it became law, it would implement new oversight requirements, establish clearer procedures for dispute resolution, and create real penalties for board members who abuse their authority. It wouldn't solve every problem, but it was a start. I also saw that Derek's investigation had led to Southwest Gas Corporation implementing new training protocols for their investigators and working more closely with law enforcement on theft of service cases. My case had apparently highlighted some gaps in how these crimes were prosecuted. Setting down my phone, I walked to the sliding glass door and looked out at my backyard. The Arizona night was clear and cool, the sky full of stars you could never see in the city. My propane tank sat snugly in its cedar screen, properly secured and ready for my next grilling session. It had been a long, strange journey from that Saturday morning when Linda had marched into my yard to tonight, standing in a home and neighborhood that finally felt peaceful. The cost had been high in terms of time, stress, and aggravation, but the outcome had been worth it. I raised my glass in a silent toast to standing up for yourself, to accountability, and to the simple right to enjoy your property without harassment. Then I finished my whiskey and headed to bed, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another peaceful day in Meadowbrook Estates, free from the tyranny of HOA Karen and her clipboard. The next morning, I woke to my alarm and went through my usual routine. Coffee, shower, quick breakfast, and out the door for work. I was an IT consultant for a firm in downtown Phoenix, and I had a full day of client meetings ahead. As I backed out of my driveway, I waved to Marcus, who was getting his mail. The morning was already warming up, promising another beautiful Arizona day. Work was busy but productive. Around lunch, I got an email from Robert Stafford with an attached draft of the proposed bylaw revisions. I skimmed through them during my break and was impressed. They'd really thought things through, implementing checks and balances, requiring board votes for major decisions, and creating an independent mediation process for disputes. I sent back some minor suggestions and got back to work. That evening, I decided to grill some steaks for dinner. As I connected my propane tank and fired up the grill, I couldn't help but smile. Such a simple pleasure cooking outdoors, but it had been at the center of such a storm. My phone rang as I was flipping the steaks. It was Derek. "Hey man, wanted to give you an update. Remember how I mentioned other utility companies were interested in our investigation procedures?" "Yeah. Well, Arizona Public Service, Southwest Gas, and several other utilities are partnering to create a task force specifically for investigating utility theft and theft of service. They want me to head it up." "Derek, that's fantastic. Congratulations." "Thanks. And honestly, it wouldn't have happened without your case. It really highlighted how these crimes can fly under the radar and how important it is to investigate them properly. I'm glad something positive came out of it besides just my own situation. Way more than just positive. We've already started getting tips about other cases. Turns out, there's a lot more utility theft happening than anyone realized. People tapping into natural gas lines, rigging electric meters, stealing propane. It's a real problem. After we hung up, I finished grilling my steaks and sat down to eat on my patio. The evening was cooling down nicely, and I could hear kids playing in a yard a few streets over. Normal suburban sounds, peaceful and pleasant. Over the next few months, life continued to improve in Meadowbrook Estates. The new bylaws were ratified by a vote of the homeowners in January. The vote was nearly unanimous, with only 3 people voting against the changes. I suspected one of those votes was from someone loyal to Linda, but I didn't care enough to investigate. The community started organizing more social events. There was a neighborhood garage sale in February, a community garden project in March, and plans for a summer block party were already in the works. I even joined the bylaw review committee officially, meeting once a month with other homeowners and board members to ensure the rules made sense and weren't overly restrictive. It was actually interesting work, finding that balance between maintaining standards and respecting individual property rights. In March, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Linda Pemberton. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a handwritten note, and unlike the court-ordered apology, this one seemed genuine. "Kevin, I know you have no reason to read this or care what I have to say, but I wanted to write to you anyway. The past few months have been the most difficult of my life. I lost my position, my reputation, my home, and my standing in the community. At first, I blamed you for all of it. I was angry and felt victimized, but I've been seeing a therapist, and through our sessions, I've come to realize that I brought this on myself. I was so focused on maintaining control and enforcing rules that I lost sight of what really mattered: building a community where people actually wanted to live. I took your propane tank because I was angry that you hadn't immediately jumped to comply with my demands. It was petty and wrong, and I compounded that wrong by trying to justify it instead of admitting my mistake and making it right. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, for what I did, and for the stress I caused you and our former neighbors. I hope Meadowbrook Estates is thriving. It was a good community, and it deserved better than what I gave it. Linda, I read the letter twice, then set it down on my kitchen counter. I felt a mix of emotions: satisfaction that she'd finally taken responsibility, sadness that it had taken so much for her to reach that point, and a small measure of hope that she might actually change. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't need to. She'd said what she needed to say, and I'd heard it. That was enough. Spring turned to summer, and Phoenix heated up the way it always did, with temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees. But inside Meadowbrook Estates, the atmosphere remained cool and pleasant. The new board was doing an excellent job, maintaining the property without the oppressive oversight that had characterized Linda's tenure. In June, I got a call from a woman named Veronica Andrews who worked for a nonprofit called HOA Reform Coalition. She'd been following my case and wanted to know if I'd be willing to serve on an advisory board they were forming. "We're working with legislators in several states to push for better HOA oversight and accountability," she explained. "We need people who have been through the system and understand both the problems and potential solutions." I agreed, figuring that if I could help prevent other people from going through what I'd experienced, it was worth the time commitment. The advisory board met quarterly, usually via video conference, though we had an in-person meeting in Denver in July. It was fascinating meeting other people who'd had similar experiences with overzealous HOAs. One woman from Florida had been fined $10,000 for painting her door a shade of white that was slightly different from the approved color. A man from Texas had been foreclosed on because of a disputed $50 fine. Our discussions led to several recommendations for model legislation that states could adopt. Key provisions included mandatory mediation before fines could be levied, caps on fine amounts, clearer procedures for board elections and recalls, and most importantly, criminal liability for board members who engaged in theft, fraud, or other illegal activities while claiming HOA authority. By August, the Arizona HOA reform bill had passed both houses of the state legislature and was awaiting the governor's signature. It included many of the provisions we'd recommended, and it had been named, somewhat ironically, the HOA Accountability and Transparency Act. Vanessa Chen did another story on the new law, and this time she interviewed me, Derek, and even Robert Stafford about how the reforms would affect communities like Meadowbrook Estates. "These changes are long overdue," Robert said on camera. "HOAs serve an important function, but they need to operate with transparency and accountability, just like any other organization." The governor signed the bill into law in September, almost exactly 1 year after Linda's conviction. I attended the signing ceremony in the state capitol, along with dozens of other homeowners who'd advocated for reform. Standing in that ornate room, watching the governor put pen to paper, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had started as a dispute over a propane tank had led to real, meaningful change that would affect thousands of homeowners across Arizona. After the ceremony, several legislators came up to thank me for sharing my story and pushing for reform. "You know," one state senator told me, "we hear about problems like this all the time, but most people don't follow through. They complain but don't take action. You took action and you made a difference." I returned to Meadowbrook Estates that evening feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of the past year, all the stress and conflict and legal proceedings, finally felt like it was truly behind me. The neighborhood was quiet when I got home, just the usual evening sounds of people finishing dinner and settling in for the night. I parked in my driveway and walked to my front door, stopping to check my mailbox on the way. Inside was the usual assortment of bills and junk mail, but there was also an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. I opened it inside and found a check for $200 from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, along with a note from Robert. "Kevin, after reviewing all fines and violations issued during the previous administration, we determined that you were charged inappropriately multiple times. This check represents a full refund of all fines you paid, with interest. Thank you for your patience and for your service to our community." Robert, I set the check on my counter next to Linda's letter, two bookends to a very strange chapter of my life. One represented the cost of standing up for yourself, the other the benefits of accountability and reform. That Saturday, Meadowbrook Estates held its summer block party. The street was closed off, and someone had rented a bounce house for the kids. There were grills set up along the sidewalk, each family contributing something to a massive cookout. I brought burgers and my new propane tank, properly secured in its cedar screen, which I'd transported in my truck. Marcus helped me set up my grill station, and soon we had a good operation going, flipping burgers and hot dogs for the growing crowd. "This is pretty great," Marcus said, looking around at all the neighbors mingling and laughing. "Can't imagine Linda ever organizing something like this." "No," I agreed. She was too busy measuring grass and counting flowers. A kid ran by chasing a ball, nearly knocking over my cooler, but I caught it just in time. The kid's mom apologized profusely, but I just laughed it off. It was a party. Things happened. As the afternoon wore on and the Arizona sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I found myself standing back and just observing. Families were scattered across the closed-off street. Kids were playing. Adults were talking and laughing. This was what a community was supposed to be. People coming together, enjoying each other's company, supporting one another. Not a neighborhood ruled by fear of violation notices and arbitrary fines. Robert found me by the grill as I was cooking the last batch of burgers. "Kevin, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "The board wants to know if you'd consider running for a position. We've got an opening coming up when Sally Richardson moves next month, and we think you'd be a great addition." I considered it. A year ago, I would have said no without hesitation. But now, after everything that had happened and all the positive changes we'd implemented, I actually felt drawn to the idea. "Let me think about it," I said. "But I'm not opposed. That's all I ask, just think about it." As the party wound down and people started heading home, I packed up my grill and propane tank. The tank that had started everything, or at least the second one, since the original was still sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, I assumed. Actually, I realized I'd never asked what happened to it. I called Derek the next day to find out. "Oh yeah, it got released from evidence after the trial concluded," he said. "It should have been returned to you. Did you not get it?" "No, I never heard anything about it." Let me make some calls. It's definitely yours and you should have it back." 2 days later, a Phoenix Police Department evidence clerk called to let me know I could pick up my original propane tank. I drove down to the evidence facility on a Tuesday afternoon and signed the necessary paperwork. When they brought out the tank, I couldn't help but laugh. There was my address, visible under the layer of paint Linda had hastily applied, exactly as Derek had described. It seemed like such a petty thing now, this tank that had caused so much trouble. I loaded it into my truck and drove home. Now I had 2 propane tanks, which actually wasn't a bad thing. I could keep one as a backup for when the first ran out. Life settled into a comfortable pattern over the following months. I continued working with the HOA Reform Coalition on their advisory board, helping to develop best practices and model legislation for other states. The work was rewarding and felt meaningful. In Meadowbrook Estates, I eventually agreed to join the HOA board, filling Sally Richardson's position when she moved. The work was surprisingly enjoyable when it was focused on actually helping the community rather than enforcing petty rules. We organized regular events, maintained the common areas properly, and handled disputes with fairness and common sense. Violation notices became rare, issued only for actual problems like broken fences or abandoned vehicles, not for grass being a quarter-inch too tall. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates actually increased over the next year, not despite the relaxed enforcement, but perhaps because of it. People wanted to live in a community that felt welcoming and reasonable. I heard through the grapevine that Linda had moved again, this time out of state. Apparently, her reputation had followed her in Scottsdale, and she'd decided to start fresh somewhere where nobody knew her story. I wished her well, genuinely hoping she'd found some peace and learned from her mistakes. Derek's utility theft task force was making real progress, investigating dozens of cases across Arizona and working with law enforcement to prosecute offenders. He'd been promoted and was being recognized as a leader in his field. "None of this would have happened without your case," he told me over beers one evening. "It really opened people's eyes to how serious these crimes can be and how important proper investigation is." "I just wanted my propane tank back," I joked. "Yeah, but you didn't stop there. You pushed for accountability, and that made all the difference." As I sat there with my friend, I realized how much my life had changed in the past 2 years. I'd gone from being a guy who just wanted to grill in peace to someone actively involved in community governance and reform advocacy. It hadn't been my plan, but life rarely follows our plans. The important thing was that something good had come from a bad situation. Linda's theft had been wrong, but the response to it had created positive change that would benefit thousands of people. And I could grill on my patio whenever I wanted, with 2 properly screened propane tanks at my disposal, in a neighborhood that felt like an actual community. That seemed like a pretty good outcome. Years later, when people asked me about the whole situation, I'd tell them it was about more than just a propane tank. It was about standing up for yourself when someone abuses their authority. It was about not accepting that rules give people the right to treat others unfairly. And it was about turning a negative experience into positive change. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. Not the conflicts we face, but how we respond to them and what we do with the aftermath. Linda Pemberton took my propane tank, and she faced justice for it. But more importantly, her actions sparked a movement that made HOAs more accountable and communities better for everyone. And I could live with that ending just fine.